The storm came sideways. Not rain, not wind. An ion storm, the kind that turned the air into a crackling white curtain of static and made every piece of metal within 50 miles hum like a struck tuning fork. The kind that killed people who were stupid enough to be outside. Ethan Cole was outside. He sat in the cockpit of his salvage crawler, a rusted beast of a vehicle he had rebuilt 3 times with parts that were never meant to fit together, and he watched the storm eat the horizon. The scanner on his dash blinked with the usual garbage: electromagnetic noise, ghost signals, the electronic heartbeat of a planet that wanted everything on its surface dead. Then it caught something else. A distress beacon. Not human. The frequency was wrong. Too high, too layered, like someone had braided 3 signals into one. Ethan stared at the blinking dot on his screen. His hands, scarred from years of pulling apart wrecked ships, rested on the steering column. He was 36 years old. He had been a Union Marine for 12 of those years. He had left the service after a mission on Titan that he did not talk about, moved to the farthest colony he could find, and spent the last 4 years pulling metal from the ground and selling it to people who asked no questions. He had no family, no friends worth the word, no reason to drive into an ion storm for a signal that was not even human. He drove into the storm. The crawler shook like a dog trying to throw off water. Lightning, not real lightning, but something close, something this planet had invented on its own, struck the ground ahead of him in bursts of purple and white. His scanner held the signal. 2 miles out, then 1, then half. He saw the ship. It was buried nose first in a field of volcanic glass, the black surface shattered into jagged teeth around the point of impact. The ship was small, elegant in a way human ships never were, all smooth curves and organic lines, like someone had grown it instead of built it. Half of it was crushed, the other half was on fire. Drelith. Ethan knew the design. Everyone in the frontier did, even if most had never seen one in person. The Drelith were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. Tall, scaled, predatory. They kept to themselves, guarded their borders with warships that could crack moons, and they did not like humans. The smart thing was to log the coordinates and send a report to the Union comm relay. Ethan grabbed his kit and stepped out into the storm. The heat hit him first. The volcanic glass radiated warmth, even in the howling cold of the ion wind, and the burning ship added its own. He covered his face with his arm and moved toward the wreckage. Inside, everything was dead. The pilot was still in the seat, or what was left of the seat. 2 escort guards lay crumpled against the far wall, their massive bodies broken by the impact. An attendant of some kind had been thrown clear across the cabin and lay face down in a pool of dark blue blood. The smell was sharp, metallic, alien. Ethan checked each one. Training that was years old, but buried in his muscles, not his memory, took over. Pulse points, airway, response, nothing, nothing, nothing. He moved deeper into the ship. The passenger hold was crushed almost flat. The ceiling bowed down to within 3 feet of the floor. He dropped to his hands and knees and crawled. That was when he heard it. A sound, small, thin. A whimper that was not quite a whimper. More like a vibration, a hum that he felt in his chest before he heard it with his ears. She was pinned under a support beam. Ethan did not know much about Drelith biology, but he knew enough to understand that this was a child. She was small, maybe 3 feet long, with silver-blue skin that shimmered even in the dim emergency lighting. She had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on her face, and all 4 of them were open, wide, locked on him with a terror so raw, it hit him like a physical blow. Along her neck, delicate frills of tissue pulsed with light. Violet, rapid, frantic. The beam across her midsection was thick and hot. Ethan touched it and pulled his hand back. The metal had been superheated by the crash. He could see where it pressed into her side, and the skin there was dark, bruised, wrong. He did not have time to think about it. He pulled the hydraulic jack from his kit, wedged it under the beam, and pumped. The jack groaned. The beam shifted. 1 inch, 2. The child made a sound that he would hear in his sleep for years. A high, keening note that was pain and fear and a desperate animal hope, all woven together. 3 inches, 4. He reached in and pulled her free. The metal of the beam scraped across his forearms and the backs of his hands as he dragged her out. He smelled his own skin burning before he felt it. The pain came a second later, white and blinding, and he bit down on the inside of his cheek hard enough to taste blood. She was in his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her 4 eyes stared up at him, and her frills pulsed so fast they were almost a solid sheet of violet light. Then she grabbed him. Her small hands, 3-fingered, tipped with tiny claws that would one day be weapons, locked onto his jacket with a strength that did not match her size. She pressed her face into his chest, and she held on like he was the last solid thing in a universe that had just tried to kill her. Ethan stood up. He held her against him with his burned hands, and he walked back through the dead ship, past the bodies of her people, out into the screaming storm. The walk back to Dust Haven took 40 minutes. He did not remember most of it. He remembered the weight of her. He remembered the way her frills slowly shifted from violet to something darker, something that meant she was losing consciousness. He remembered talking to her, saying nothing that mattered. Just words, just sound, just a human voice in the howling dark. He remembered the medbay doors, the lights, Dr. Vasquez's face going white. "What the hell is that?" "A kid," Ethan said. "She's hurt." He tried to set her down on the examination table. Her hands would not let go. Her claws had punctured through his jacket and into the skin beneath, and she held on with the blind, ferocious grip of something small that had decided this was the thing keeping her alive. He sat down on the table beside her. Vasquez worked around him. 3 hours later, the doctor told him the child would survive. Fractured limb, internal bruising, deep physiological shock. She needed rest, fluids, warmth. "You can put her down now," Vasquez said. Ethan tried. He carefully, gently pried one small hand from his jacket. The child screamed. Not a cry, not a whimper. A scream that rattled the instruments on the metal trays and made Vasquez step back with her hands over her ears. A sound that was not just fear, but the absolute primal refusal of a creature who had lost everything and would not, could not, lose this one thing too. Ethan stopped trying to let go. He leaned back against the wall, settled the child against his chest, and let her hold on. Her frills pulsed once, twice, then settled into a slow, steady rhythm. Not violet, blue, soft, quiet blue. Ethan did not know what that color meant. Not yet. But he stayed, and she slept. And outside the storm raged on, without them. She would not eat for anyone else. Dr. Vasquez tried. She prepared nutrient paste based on what little the Union Medical Database had on Drelith biology, which was almost nothing, and she held the small bowl out to the child with steady hands and a gentle voice. The child stared at her with all 4 eyes and pressed herself deeper into Ethan's side. Administrator Holt tried. He crouched down with a plate of protein strips and what he probably thought was a friendly smile. The child's frills went violet, and she bared teeth that were already sharper than they had any right to be in a mouth that small. Holt left quickly. On the second day, Ethan dipped his finger in the nutrient paste and held it out. The child sniffed it, licked it, then grabbed the bowl from his hand and ate the entire thing so fast she choked, and Ethan had to pat her back while she coughed blue-tinged paste onto his only clean shirt. That became the pattern. If Ethan touched it first, she would accept it. If he was the one offering, she would take it. If anyone else approached while he was not in the room, and he learned this the hard way on day 3, when he stepped out to use the bathroom, the result was a sound like a fire alarm crossed with a wounded animal. A shriek that brought every colonist within 200 meters running. "She's imprinted on you," Vasquez said on day 4. She was reviewing what little xenobiology literature existed on the Drelith. Most of it old, most of it speculation. Pack species. The young bond with protectors during periods of extreme stress. It is survival programming. Her brain has decided you are the thing standing between her and death, and it will not let go of that decision. "For how long?" Ethan asked. Vasquez did not answer, which was an answer. He learned her rhythms. The frills were the key to everything. Violet meant fear. Blue meant calm. A rapid flickering between colors meant she was processing something new, trying to decide if it was safe. And amber, a warm, honeyed glow that spread slowly from the base of her neck to the tips of her frills, meant she was content, happy, at ease. He saw Amber for the first time on day 5. He had been sitting with her in the medbay, restless, bored, drumming his fingers on the metal railing of her cot. She watched his fingers. He drummed a little rhythm. She tilted her head. He drummed it again. She reached out and put her hand flat on top of his, stopping the drumming, and looked up at him with all 4 eyes wide. 3 small taps on the back of his hand. Amber, slow and warm, spreading across her frills like sunrise. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. Something old and sealed and deliberately forgotten. He started humming to her at night. He did not know any lullabies, so he hummed the startup sequence of his salvage crawler's engine, a low, rumbling drone that he knew by heart. She curled against him, and her frills pulsed amber in time with the sound, and she slept without screaming for the first time since the crash. On day 6, she spoke. It was not a word exactly. It was his name pushed through a mouth that was not built for human sounds. All the vowels shifted. The consonants softened into something almost musical. "Etan." He looked at her. "Etan," she said again, and touched his face with her small 3-fingered hand. "That's me," he said. She processed this. 4 eyes blinked in sequence, top to bottom. Then she pointed at herself and said a word in Drelith that sounded like water running over stones. "Vela?" he tried. Her frills lit up amber so bright the room glowed. After that, words came fast. She was smart. Scary smart. By day 7, she had a vocabulary of 30 standard words, and she used them in combinations that were not quite grammar, but were absolutely communication. Etan go no meant he was not allowed to leave. Food bad meant she did not like the protein strips. Outside want meant she wanted to see the sky. He took her to the observation deck on day 7, carried her because her fractured limb was still healing, and she refused the small crutch Vasquez had made. He set her down on the wide metal bench that faced the viewport and sat beside her. She stared at the stars. Her frills did something he had not seen before. They went still, completely still, just a soft, silver luminescence that matched her skin, as if she was trying to blend into the starlight itself. She pointed at a bright cluster near the horizon and said something in Drelith, a question. "I don't know that one," Ethan said. He pointed to a different part of the sky, toward a dim yellow dot that was barely visible through the planet's atmosphere. "That one's mine. That's where Earth is." "Earth," Vela said. "Earth," he corrected. "Earth," she said again, firmly, as if the matter was settled. She leaned against him. Her frills went amber. She reached out and wrapped her hand around his index finger. Her whole hand barely covered it, and held on. They sat like that for a long time. On day 8, Holt came to him with the look of a man carrying news he did not want to deliver. Ethan was in the mess hall, trying to convince Vela that coffee was a drink and not a punishment. She had taken one sip, made a face that used all four eyes and both sets of eyelids to express total betrayal, and pushed the cup away so hard it nearly went off the table. She liked peanut butter. She ate it with her fingers, directly from the jar. And when Ethan tried to introduce the concept of a spoon, she looked at him as if he had suggested something offensive. "Cole," Holt said. "A word." They stepped aside. Vela watched them from the table, her frills shifting to a cautious blue-green. She did not like it when Ethan talked to other people without her. Holt handed him a printed message. Union Diplomatic Corps, Priority Channel. Ethan read it. The Dralith hegemony had been contacted. A delegation was coming. 72 hours. He was to hand over the child immediately upon their arrival, and he was not to resist. The language was careful and cold, and carried the specific weight of people who were very afraid and wanted to make sure that fear was someone else's problem. Ethan read it again. He folded the message and put it in his pocket, and went back to the table. Vela held up the jar of peanut butter and said, "More." "You've had half the jar." "More," she said, with the absolute conviction of a creature who had discovered the greatest food in the universe and saw no reason for moderation. He gave her more. He watched her eat it. He watched her frills glow amber. 72 hours. He did not sleep that night. Vela did, curled in the cot beside his bunk, one hand reaching across the gap between them, her fingers wrapped around his thumb. Her frills pulsed with the slow, steady rhythm of deep sleep, amber fading in and out like breathing. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about the message. He thought about the Dralith, what he knew about them, which was not much, and what he had heard about them, which was mostly fear. He thought about the fact that in 72 hours, people were going to come and take her away, and she was going to scream, and he was going to have to stand there and let it happen because she was not his. She had never been his. She was an alien child from a species that could crush humanity like an afterthought, and he was a broken salvage worker on a rock at the edge of nowhere. And the only reason she clung to him was because her brain was wired to grab the nearest warm body in a crisis. That was all this was. Biology, chemistry, survival programming. He looked at her hand around his thumb. He did not believe a single word of what he had just told himself. The warship came first. Not a diplomatic vessel. Not a shuttle with a flag and a polite request. A hegemony dreadnought. 3 kilometers of dark metal and living chitin, and weapon systems that could turn the surface of Kepler 442b into a memory. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel so close to the planet that the shockwave rattled every window in Dusthaven and knocked a stack of crates off a loading platform in the hangar. Then the fighters deployed, dozens of them, sleek and organic, fanning out across the sky in formations that were not defensive. Holt stood at the colony's command console with a face the color of old paper. "They brought a war fleet," he said, "for one child." Ethan stood behind him, with Vela in his arms. She had felt the shockwave, and her frills had gone violet, and she had climbed him like a tree, all 4 eyes wide, claws digging into his shoulders through his jacket. "She's not just any child," Vasquez said quietly. She had spent the last 3 days reading everything the Union database had on Dralith's social structure. The ship she was on was a diplomatic courier. That's not a transport for common families. Whoever her people are, they're important. The comm crackled. A voice came through, deep, resonant, translated by software that could not quite capture the harmonic layers underneath. "Colony designated Dusthaven. You hold a child of the Sorrenti brood. A delegation will arrive at your surface in 1 planetary hour. You will not interfere. You will present the child. There will be no discussion." The channel closed. Holt turned to Ethan. "Give her to me. I'll have her cleaned up and ready when—" Vela's frills went from violet to a deep, warning crimson. She bared her teeth at Holt and pressed her face into Ethan's neck. "I'll get her ready," Ethan said. He took her to the medbay. He checked the splint on her arm, which was healing fast. Draelith biology was remarkable. He sat on the edge of the cot and looked at her and tried to figure out how to explain what was about to happen. "Your family is coming," he said. She tilted her head. "Your people, your mother, maybe. They're coming to take you home." She processed this. 4 eyes blinked. "Eton come?" The crack in his chest opened a little wider. "No, kid, I don't think so." "Eton come," she said again. Not a question this time. He did not answer. The shuttle landed in the colony's main bay with a precision that made the human pilots in the crowd mutter with reluctant admiration. It was beautiful, in the way a predator was beautiful, all smooth curves and dark surfaces, alive with faint bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. The ramp lowered. 4 Draelith warriors came down first. Each one stood over 7 feet tall, encased in armor that looked grown rather than forged, and they carried weapons that hummed with a low, dangerous frequency. They fanned out and took positions with the mechanical efficiency of soldiers who had done this 10,000 times. Then the commander descended. A male, lean and sharp-featured, with scales the color of a deep ocean and eyes like polished obsidian. He scanned the assembled colonists with a contempt so casual it was almost elegant. His gaze passed over the humans the way a person's gaze might pass over furniture. Then came the matriarch. Every human in the bay took a step back. Not a decision, an instinct, old and deep, the same instinct that had once told their ancestors to get away from the thing in the tall grass. Thyra Sorrenthe was 8 feet tall. Her scales were deep obsidian, streaked with veins of crimson bioluminescence that pulsed with each step. She wore ceremonial warplate, living chitin that covered her torso and shoulders like a second skin, edges sharp enough to cut. Her face was angular, predatory, dominated by 4 eyes that burned with an intelligence so fierce it was almost physical. She was not beautiful. She was magnificent. The distinction mattered. She walked through the bay and the crowd parted, and she did not slow down or acknowledge any of them. Her eyes were fixed forward. Her stride was long and certain, and the sound of her armored feet on the metal floor was the only sound in the bay. Ethan stood near the med-bay door, with Vela in his arms. Thyra saw her daughter. She stopped. For one moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe less, the terrifying alien warlord was gone. What stood in her place was something older and simpler and universal across every species that had ever lived and loved and feared losing what it loved. A mother seeing her child alive when she had believed her child was dead. Her crimson bioluminescence flickered. Her composure cracked. Just a fracture. Just a hairline. But Ethan saw it. Then it sealed. The matriarch returned. She closed the distance. The commander and the warriors fell in behind her. She stopped 6 feet from Ethan and looked down at him. Ethan had faced hostile fire on 3 different worlds. He had walked into a burning ship in an ion storm. He had once stared down a drill sergeant from Proxima who was famous for making recruits cry. Nothing in his life had prepared him for the weight of this gaze. Vela stirred in his arms. She turned and saw her mother and made a sound, a deep, resonant trill that started in her chest and rose through her throat, a sound Ethan had never heard from her before. A Draelith word for something he did not have a translation for. Thyra answered with the same sound, lower. The harmonics of it vibrated in Ethan's ribs. Vela reached for her mother. But she did not let go of Ethan. She held onto his jacket with one hand, and reached for Thyra with the other, stretching between them. And her frills cycled through a rapid sequence of colors: violet, blue, amber, violet, amber, as if her body was trying to process two truths at the same time. "Etan," she said, looking at her mother. "Etan's safe. Etan kept me." Then she looked at Ethan. "Mother," she said in Standard, a word he had taught her just 2 days ago. Thyra's 4 eyes moved from her daughter to Ethan. She studied him. His burned hands, still bandaged. His jacket, punctured with tiny claw holes. The way he held her daughter, careful, natural, like he had done it 1,000 times. She spoke. The translator in the bay's overhead system rendered her voice into Standard, but it could not capture the depth, the resonance, the authority. "You are the one who pulled her from the wreck." "Yes," Ethan said. "You were burned. The beam was hot. You carried her through the storm. She couldn't walk." Thyra's gaze dropped to his hands, to the bandages, to the small clawed hand still gripping his jacket. "She gives you the bond glow," Thyra said. Ethan did not know what that meant, but the commander behind Thyra, the one with the ocean-dark scales and the contemptuous eyes, made a sharp sound, something between a gasp and a hiss. His contempt was gone. What replaced it was harder to read. "By the ancient law of the Serenthi brood," Thyra said, and her voice filled the bay like something poured from a great height. "When a child bestows the bond glow upon a protector, that protector is claimed. You are Serenthi. You will come with us." Silence. Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" "It is not a request, human. You want to take me? I am telling you that you are ours." He looked at Holt, watching a meteor he could not dodge. He looked at Vasquez. Vasquez had her hand over her mouth. He looked out at Vela. She was watching him with all 4 eyes, her frills steady amber, and she was smiling, or doing the Drelith equivalent, which involved a slight widening of her mouth and a tilt of her head that he had learned meant joy. "Etan, come," she said. Thyra stepped forward. She was close enough now that Ethan had to tilt his head back to look at her. Her shadow swallowed him whole. She reached out with one massive hand, clawed, scaled, capable of tearing through steel, and she took Vela from his arms with a gentleness that made the air itself go quiet. Vela nestled into her mother's chest, against the living armor, and trilled that deep sound again. Home, safe, found. But her hand stayed on Ethan's jacket. She would not let go. Thyra looked down at him over her daughter's head. The crimson of her bioluminescence softened. Not to amber, not that far, but to something warmer. Something that acknowledged what he had done, what he was, what he had given. "You saved what is most precious to me," she said. "I will not let you go." Kathvora was not a planet. It was a cathedral. That was Ethan's first thought when the shuttle broke through the upper atmosphere and the world opened beneath him. Crystalline forests stretched from horizon to horizon, their trunks translucent, their canopies refracting the light of 2 suns into prismatic fire. Oceans glowed faintly from within, bioluminescent currents tracing patterns across their surface like the nervous system of something alive and dreaming. Mountain ranges rose in impossible spires, and carved into them, growing from them, were the brood citadels. The Serenthi citadel sat at the heart of a mountain so tall its peak vanished into cloud. The structure was half-built, half-grown, a fusion of stone and living chitin that pulsed with the same crimson bioluminescence as Thyra's scales. Towers spiraled upward like horns. Bridges of grown bone connected them, thin and impossibly strong. The whole thing breathed. Ethan could see it. A slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction, as if the building itself had lungs. He stepped off the shuttle, and every Drelith in the courtyard stopped what they were doing and stared. He was used to feeling small. He had spent his career around heavy machinery, warships, industrial equipment. Smallness was familiar. This was different. The courtyard was full of Drelith, warriors, attendants, workers, elders, and the smallest of them was 6.5 feet tall. Most were closer to 8. Their scales ranged from deep blue to emerald green to the obsidian crimson of Thyra's bloodline. And every single one of them turned to look at the creature standing at the matriarch's side. The pale, soft, clawless thing that barely reached their chests. Ethan could feel the assessment. Not hostile. Exactly. The way a person might look at a puppy that had wandered into a board meeting. "They think you are fragile," said a voice behind him. Low, sharp, carrying an edge of amusement that was not quite friendly. Ethan turned. The speaker was young, for a Drelith, maybe the equivalent of a human in his early 20s. He was tall, lean, and built like a weapon that had not yet been fully sharpened. His scales were the same obsidian crimson as Thyra's, and his 4 eyes held the particular arrogance of someone who had never once in his life been the weakest thing in the room. "Kale Sorenthi," the young Drelith said, "firstborn of the matriarch, and you are the human my sister has claimed as her pet." "Ethan Cole," Ethan said, "and she's not my owner." Kale's frills flickered with something unreadable. "In the brood, the child's bond claim is absolute. You belong to this family now, human. Whether you are worthy of it is another question." He walked away before Ethan could respond. The first weeks were hard. Ethan's quarters were in the family wing of the Citadel. An honor. Thyra's advisor, Elder Sorvan, informed him that he clearly did not deserve. The room was enormous by human standards, carved from the mountain's living rock, with a window that overlooked the crystalline forest below. The bed was a shallow depression in the floor, filled with something warm and soft that he eventually realized was alive, a kind of moss that adjusted its temperature to match his body. He did not sleep well in it. He slept on the stone floor beside it for the first 4 nights, because the floor reminded him of the barracks on Titan, and familiar discomfort was easier than alien luxury. Vela came to his room every morning. Her arm was fully healed now, Drelith biology doing in weeks what would have taken a human child months, and she arrived each day with increasing energy and an expanding vocabulary that mixed standard and Drelith into something entirely her own. She gave him language lessons, or rather, she talked at him in Drelith, and grew exasperated when he could not replicate sounds that required vocal structures he did not possess. He learned to understand more than he could speak. He learned that the Drelith language had 7 words for loyalty and no word for surrender. He learned the brood. The Sorenthi were not just a family. They were a political dynasty, a military force, and a biological unit, all woven into one. The Citadel housed 300 Drelith, all connected by blood or bond, all answering to Thyra, and Thyra answered to no one. She was matriarch, the heart of the brood, the final authority, the one whose word was law within these walls. Elder Sorvan tolerated Ethan the way a person tolerates a stain on an otherwise perfect garment. He was polite, he was correct, and every time Ethan entered a room, Sorvan's frills went a precise shade of irritated green that he probably thought was subtle. Kale was worse. He did not bother with subtlety. He trained in the courtyard every morning, combat drills with other young warriors, all claws and speed and brutal efficiency. And he made sure Ethan was watching. The message was clear. You are soft, you are slow, you do not belong here. Ethan watched. He said nothing. He learned. The first shift came on day 19. A hunting party, 6 warriors, including Kale, went into the deep forest to track a prey animal for a brood feast. An unseasonable storm rolled in. Not an ion storm like Kepler's, but a magnetic tempest that scrambled Drelith bionavigation, the internal compass that their species used to orient in their own forests. They were lost. For 3 hours, the Citadel had no contact with the party. Thyra paced the command hall, her composure intact, but her frills betraying a mother's fear. Ethan walked into the hall with a box of salvaged parts he had been tinkering with since his second day in the Citadel. "I can find them," he said. Sorvan looked at him with polite disdain. "You cannot navigate the deep forest, human. You would be dead within the hour." "I don't need to navigate. I need to send a signal they can follow back." He built a directional beacon in 30 minutes. It was ugly, held together with wire and biological adhesive he had scraped from a wall panel, and it broadcast on a frequency that cut through the magnetic interference like a knife through cloth. Human engineering. Mechanical. Electrical. Completely foreign to a species whose technology was grown, not built. The hunting party followed it home. Kale walked into the Citadel courtyard with mud on his scales, and a look on his face that Ethan could not read. He stopped in front of Ethan, stared down at him, said nothing. Then he walked past. But his frills, for just a moment, flickered amber. The second shift came on day 31. Kale took a bad hit during a training bout. A sparring partner's claw caught the gap between his shoulder plates and opened a gash that bled freely. The brood healer was in the lower Citadel, 20 minutes away. Kale sat on the training ground, with dark blue blood running down his arm, and his jaw clenched against the pain. He tore a strip from his own shirt, packed the wound, applied direct pressure, and told Kale in a calm, firm voice to keep still and breathe. Kale stared at his own blood on Ethan's hands. Human hands. Small, blunt, without claws. Steady. "How do you know how to do this?" Kale asked. "I was a Marine," Ethan said. "We break a lot." The third shift was the one that changed everything. Thyra invited Ethan to observe a tactical planning session for a border dispute with a neighboring territory. The Drelith approach to conflict was direct. Overwhelming force. The largest warriors, the fastest flank, the most devastating charge. It was effective. It had worked for 10,000 years. Ethan sat in the back and listened, and said nothing for 2 hours. "You have thoughts, human. You're going to hit them head on," Ethan said. "Yes. What if you didn't?" He walked to the tactical display, a living hologram grown from bioluminescent organisms, and he laid out a different approach. A feint from the east to draw the enemy's heavy fighters out of position. A small, fast team through the valley they would leave unguarded. A strike on the supply line that would end the dispute without a single major engagement. The room went quiet. Drelith were apex predators. They had evolved at the top of their food chain, the biggest, the fastest, the most dangerous things on their world. They had never needed to be clever. They had never needed to think around a problem, because they had always been able to go through it. Humans had evolved on a world that was trying to kill them with everything it had, and they had survived not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the most stubborn, the most creative, the most relentlessly adaptable things on their planet. Thyra looked at the tactical display. She looked at Ethan. Something in her 4 ancient eyes shifted, a recognition of something she had not expected to find. "You are not strong," she said. "No. You are not fast. Definitely not. But you think like nothing I have ever encountered." She paused. Her crimson bioluminescence pulsed once, deep and slow. "I am beginning to understand why my daughter chose you." Then the message came from the capital. A rival brood clan, the Vorkath, had filed a formal challenge. The presence of a human within the Sorenthi was an abomination, they claimed. A corruption of ancient law. The bond claim was invalid. The human was to be cast out or killed. By hegemony law, the challenge required an answer. In the arena, Thyra's response was delivered to the Vorkath envoy in a voice that could have frozen starlight. "He is Sorrenthi. Touch him, and I will end your bloodline." The envoy left. The challenge stood. Vela found Ethan on the balcony that night, staring at the twin moons. She climbed into his lap without asking, as she always did, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Eton scared?" she asked. He thought about lying. He looked at her 4 wide eyes, her frills pulsing a cautious blue, and he told her the truth. "Yeah, kid. A little." She pressed her forehead against his. A Drelith gesture he had learned meant something deeper than words could carry. "Eton always comes back," she said. Not a question. The absolute, unshakable faith of a child, who had been pulled from fire and ruin by hands that refused to let go. He put his arms around her. "Yeah," he said. "I always come back." The arena of Kethsar had been carved into the caldera of a dead volcano 10,000 years before humans had learned to make fire. It was enormous. The floor was raw sand the color of old bone, ringed by walls of volcanic stone that rose 200 feet to the viewing galleries above. Bioluminescent veins threaded through the rock like arteries, pulsing in slow rhythm, as if the arena itself had a heartbeat. The galleries were filled with Drelith, thousands of them, representatives of every brood clan in the hegemony, their scales a mosaic of colors, their frills rippling with anticipation. They had come to watch a human die. Ethan stood at the entrance gate and looked at the sand. It was a long walk to the center. The gates on the opposite side were still closed. Behind them, something was breathing. Thyra had given him the choice the night before. Her quarters in the capital's guest citadel, a room of living stone that hummed with warmth. She had dismissed her guards, just the 2 of them. "I will not force you to fight," she said. "If you refuse, I will find another way. I will go to war with the Vorkath, if I must." "A war over me?" "A war over the principle that no brood clan dictates who belongs to another." She paused. "But yes, also over you." "How many would die?" She did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. "I'll fight," Ethan said. She studied him with those 4 ancient eyes. He had learned to read her over the past weeks, the subtle shifts in her bioluminescence, the micro-movements of her frills. What he saw now was not surprise. It was confirmation of something she had already suspected. "You are afraid," she said. "Terrified, and yet you will go. That's sort of our thing." Now he stood at the gate, and the sand stretched before him, and the arena was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. He walked out. The crowd did not react. 10,000 Drelith watched a small, soft, clawless creature walk to the center of the killing ground, and the silence was its own kind of commentary. He wore no armor. He had refused it. Drelith armor was too heavy for his frame. He wore his salvage clothes, patched and stained, and he carried nothing. The opposite gate opened. Drothek Vorkath was nearly 9 feet tall. His scales were the deep green of old copper, and they were thick, battle-scarred, layered, natural armor that had turned aside blades and claws for decades. His arms were long, corded with muscle, tipped with claws that could punch through a ship's hull plating. He moved with the fluid economy of a creature that had never once considered the possibility that it might lose a fight. He looked at Ethan across the sand, and his frills spread wide in the Drelith expression of contempt. The arena master, an ancient Drelith whose scales had faded to gray, spoke the ritual words. Trial of worth, to yield or to fall. The crowd answered with a low, rumbling harmonic that shook the sand. Drothek charged. There was no preamble, no circling, no posturing. He crossed 30 feet of sand in the time it took Ethan to exhale, and his fist came down like a hammer aimed at a nail. Ethan was not there. He had moved before Drothik started, not faster. That was impossible. He had read the shift of weight in Drothik's legs, the tensing of his shoulders, the direction of his leading foot, and he had moved on the prediction, not the action. Marine training. 12 years of fighting things that were bigger and stronger and meaner than him. The first lesson every recruit learned: you will never be the biggest thing in the room. Be the smartest. Drothik's fist hit sand. Ethan was 3 feet to the left and moving. The next 30 seconds were not a fight. They were a lesson in geometry. Ethan kept the arena's stone pillars, decorative columns that ringed the fighting area, between himself and Drothik, never staying in one place for more than a heartbeat, never moving in a straight line. Drothik pursued with increasing frustration, his strikes demolishing chunks of pillar, his claws leaving grooves in the stone. Ethan was not trying to win, not yet. He was learning, watching Drothik move, cataloging his patterns. Lead with the right claw, overextend on the follow-through, drop the left shoulder before a lunge, reset with a half-step back. Every predator had a pattern. Every pattern had a gap. Drothik caught him on the 31st second, a backhand sweep that Ethan tried to duck and almost made it. Almost. The claws caught his shoulder and spun him, and the sand came up to meet him, and the crowd made a sound that was not quite a cheer. Pain, bright and immediate. His left arm went numb from the shoulder down. He got up. Drothik tilted his head, a flicker of something in his eyes. Not concern, curiosity. He hit Ethan again. A kick this time, a sweeping blow to the ribs that sent him skidding across the sand like a stone skipped over water. Something cracked. 2 ribs, maybe 3. The pain was a white sheet that covered everything. He got up. The arena went quiet. Drothik hit him again and again. Each blow was measured, contemptuous, designed to end the farce. Ethan bled. His blood was red, startlingly bright, against the pale sand, and the Dralith in the galleries stared at it as if they had never seen anything like it. He got up. Every time. Every single time. The silence in the arena changed. It was not contempt anymore. It was not pity. It was something else, something the Dralith did not have a word for, because they had never needed one. They had never seen a creature so outmatched, so broken, so obviously defeated, simply refused to accept it. Drothik stood over him after the 6th knockdown. Ethan was on his knees, bleeding from a dozen wounds, one eye swollen shut, his left arm hanging useless. He looked up at the massive warrior with his one good eye. And he smiled. Not a brave smile. Not a hero's smile. A tired, bloody, absolutely unhinged grin that said, "I know something you don't." Drothik reached down to grab him. Ethan lunged, not away, forward, into Drothik's reach, inside the arc of those massive arms, so close that the Dralith's own size became the disadvantage. Ethan's right hand, his good hand, the one that had pulled a child from a burning ship, the one that had held her while she slept, closed around a jagged shard of broken pillar stone. He had been collecting them. Every time Drothik smashed a pillar, every time he sent Ethan sliding across the sand past the debris. Pieces small enough to palm, sharp enough to cut. Drothik's hand closed around Ethan's torso and lifted him off the ground. The squeeze was immense, crushing, designed to end it. Ethan felt his damaged ribs grind together. He drove the shard upward. The jaw, the gap beneath, where the scales thinned to allow the joint to move. Every suit of armor, every natural defense, every predator's body had a seam. The shard went in. Drothik made a sound, not a roar, a gasp, shocked, almost offended as if no one had ever had the audacity. His grip loosened, his legs buckled. 9 feet of Dralith warrior crashed to the sand, and Ethan fell with him, landing hard, rolling, and somehow getting to his feet. He stood over Drothic, bleeding, broken, barely able to see, swaying like a tree in a storm, standing. The arena was silent for 3 full seconds. Then the sound came, not from one throat, but from 10,000, a deep harmonic resonance that rose from the galleries and filled the caldera like a living thing. Not a cheer, something older, something that meant recognition from a species that had forgotten what it looked like to be surprised. Thyra descended the steps from the royal gallery. She moved through the sand with the measured stride of a matriarch, but her frills were blazing, crimson and amber woven together, a pattern Ethan had never seen, something that meant more than he knew. She reached him. She placed her hand on his shoulder, the uninjured one, and the weight of it was gentle, careful, aware of how fragile he was, and choosing tenderness anyway. She turned to the arena, to the thousands, to the hegemony. "You ask if this human is worthy of the Sorrenthi?" Her voice filled the caldera, each word a struck bell. "Look at him. He came to us with nothing, no claws, no scales, no venom. He had his bare hands and his will, and he has bled for my brood. He saved my daughter when no one else could reach her. He stood in this arena against a warrior twice his size, and he did not stop. The humans are small, they are soft, they are fragile." She paused. Her grip on his shoulder tightened, just a fraction. "And they are the most terrifyingly stubborn beings this galaxy has ever produced." She looked down at Ethan. Her 4 eyes held something vast and warm and absolute. "This one is mine, and I will not let him go." A streak of silver blue shot across the sand. Vela slammed into Ethan's legs with the full-body commitment of a child who had no concept of his injuries and no intention of being careful. She wrapped her arms around him and held on with that same fierce, unbreakable grip from the first night in the storm. And her frills blazed amber, so bright they cast light on the sand around them. "Ethan," she said, "told you. Always comes back." A shadow fell over them both. Kale. He stood in front of Ethan and extended his arm, wrist turned upward, claws retracted. The Dralith gesture of brotherhood, of equals. "You are Sorrenthi," Kale said. His voice was rough. His frills pulsed amber. "Now and always." Ethan looked at the arm. He looked at Kale. He looked down at Vela, clinging to his legs, glowing like a small sun. He looked up at Thyra, who stood behind him like a wall, like the wall he had once been for her daughter, multiplied by 1,000. He was broken. He was bleeding. He was surrounded by 8-foot alien predators who had decided against all logic and reason and 10,000 years of tradition that he was family. He laughed. It hurt. God, everything hurt. But the laugh came up from somewhere deep and real, and it spilled out of him. And Vela laughed too, a trilling sound that harmonized with his. And even Kale's frills flickered with something that might have been amusement. Ethan took Kale's arm. He picked up Vela with his one good hand. He leaned, just slightly, into the steadying weight of Thyra's hand on his shoulder. In the years that followed, the Dralith hegemony opened its borders to humanity for the first time in recorded history. Scholars debated the political reasons. Diplomats claimed credit. Trade agreements were signed. Alliances formed. Embassies established on worlds that had never welcomed a human footstep. But those who were there, in the arena, in the sand, under the light of a little girl's amber glow, knew the truth. It began with a man who walked into a storm because something small was crying. It began with hands that burned and held on anyway. It began with a child who chose her protector, and a mother who refused to let him go. It began, as the best things always do, with stubbornness and love.